I realized that our school district and our school board are, we're being controlled by, bureaucracies that were not putting students first, and that they had, conflicts of interest. My school board member that represents my area is a union negotiator for the California Teachers Association. So of course she's going to vote with whatever the union wants every time. That's who's paying her paycheck. So that's when I realized that I needed to run for school board, that's the only way to really fix this. And so that's when I made the decision to run for school board.
Thank you for joining me on the Restore Childhood podcast. I'm Stephanie Edmonds, and I'm joined today by Jonathan Zachreson and Scott Davison, two dads from California who have been vital in the open schools movement and getting kids back to normal, and now are running for school board. So thank you guys for joining me here today. Why don't we just start with a basic introduction, let us know a little bit about who you are, your background, and then we'll dive into some of the events that are unfolding currently.
Sure. Thank you for having me this morning. My name is Jonathan Zachreson. I'm from Roseville, California, just outside Sacramento. Pretty much once school shut down, I saw how bad it was impacting my kids. I thought it was kind of ridiculous to the extremes that we were taking. And I was frankly, I did not think schools we did an initial shutdown for about a couple of weeks, and I didn't think it was going to last beyond that. So, all right, it'll be I think it was like 2 weeks. And then we got an email when it was almost done that said they're going to extend it for a month and a half. I'm like, oh, no. So I was like, I'm going to fire the entire school board. So we got to get them off. But turned out where I was at, we actually had, decent, for the most part, decent representatives at the local level. But kind of after figuring some things out, everyone was trying to figure it out. It ended up being the problem was at the state level. So I founded Reopen California Schools in June of 2020 to focus on putting pressure at the state level to get schools to reopen. We held our first rally in July of 2020, just after Newsom, our governor, said he was going to shut down all schools, essentially 99% of public schools, because of this, arbitrary color code system that he came up with. And then over time, just as schools continue to stay closed, the movement continued to grow. And it's California was one of the worst states at reopening. So I think we probably ended up having the longest and largest movement in that regard. And in that process, I actually was able to meet Scott. I think it was January of 2021, where he was kind of sharing some of his efforts, and I'll let him talk about that. But fast forward to today, I'm now running for school board where I'm at. We had one school board member that needed to get off the board. After I entered the race, she decided not to run. So that made it a little easier, but we still have, it's an at-large race, and we have a total of 5 candidates to fill 3 slots. And it's looking pretty good right now, but I definitely have to put in the work and get as much help as I can from volunteers and any kind of supporter that helped me out with that. But so that's kind of a quick summary of my background and where I got to where I'm at.
And Scott, why don't you fill us in on the last couple of years down by you?
Yeah. And so I'm actually an attorney, but I'm a patent attorney. So when our school shut down in Carlsbad here outside San Diego, my first reaction as somebody who, studies viruses and has a biomedical science degree is, to kind of look at all the data. And I said, well, the first, there's nothing to indicate that we should close schools. I looked at all the pandemic planning guides and all this stuff. And so I immediately had a negative reaction. I said, this is a mistake. And I started to advocate to our school board. And of course, as we all know, the schools never reopened. So once it got to the fall, then our schools actually should have and could have reopened in the fall, but the school boards chose not to. And so that's when I started really advocating locally with my school board and just trying to find out why they refused to open the schools. And so, as much as we advocated and thought we were getting somewhere, every time we'd make progress, the school board would reverse and the school district would reverse course. And then we later found out that it was really the teachers union that was behind the scenes putting pressure on them, saying, we're not going to reopen, we're not coming back if you do reopen. And so there was this, kind of pushback where we realized that, the school board is not listening to the parents, they're not listening to the needs of the students, they're listening to the union. And so I made the decision at that time to just go ahead and sue the school district. And I said, well, let's just sue them because they're required to reopen under state law, and let's go after them and force them to do it. And so we initially wanted to sue the school district, and then, long story short, the state ended up changing the rules to prevent all of the schools in the entire state of California from reopening. And so then we had to shift our lawsuit to file against the state and get those rules overturned. And so that's what we ended up doing. So we ended up organizing a whole bunch of parents down here, forming a group called the Parent Association, and then suing the state, and we won, and we got the rules invalidated because they were all made up. It was all made up science. The science wasn't really science. And a judge agreed, and we were able to get the schools reopened. And then that's where you saw what we'll probably talk about in a few minutes, is that the union was always kind of behind this the whole time, and was really mad and started spying on the parents and all that kind of thing. But in the process of all of that, I realized that our school district and our school board were being controlled by bureaucracies that were not putting students first, and that they had conflicts of interest. My school board member that represents my area is a union negotiator for the California Teachers Association. So of course she's going to vote with whatever the union wants every time. That's who's paying her paycheck. So that's when I realized that I needed to run for school board, that's the only way to really fix this. And so that's when I made the decision to run for school board, and then have obviously continued to advocate since then, to just help get kids back to normal. As we see how much this has impacted them. We see how much, it's prevented them from getting back into a normal learning environment and just making friendships and getting back to sports and things like that. And so, hopefully it'll be over soon enough. But then obviously we need some voices on our school boards that are putting parents' needs and students' needs first over the needs of these unions and bureaucracies.
I believe it was you, Jonathan, who had a Freedom of Information request, right? That was fulfilled. And you guys found out that not only are the unions working against you, but they are in cahoots with the schools. Instead of making the parents their partners, they're making them their enemies. So can you tell us what you guys discovered?
Sure, yeah. So first, I was more of I would say the media face and the public, making that go public. There are other parents that down in San Diego that Scott actually knows, who filed that public records request here in California is what we call it. So, but before I do that, just talk a little bit about the structure for those that may not know, and at least this is how it is in California. A lot of school districts and the teachers will have an association affiliated with that particular school district. So where I'm at is the Roseville Teachers Association. In this particular example, it was the San Diego, I think, Union High School, or San Diego Union, or as unified or union?
It's a union high school district, so just high school.
Union High School, San Diego Union High School District. And so they have their local association, and then those associations could be affiliated with either the California Teachers Association or the California Federated Teachers, I believe that's what's called, but that's not as popular.
But those are teacher unions, right? Those
are state unions, and the CTA then rolls up to NEA, and then you have the CFT that rolls up to AFT, which is, we all know about Randy Weinberg. And when we get to that, we can try to distinguish the two a little bit, just because it matters somewhat. But the idea is we have very powerful state unions, and then we have these local unions. And sometimes the local unions aren't necessarily in alignment with the state unions, but again, they have the power, and this is where all the money is. And so, they kind of still stay part of that. And anyway, so that's kind of the background here. In this particular district, I would say that the local association was in alignment with CTA and wanting to keep schools closed. I mean, they had sued before Scott and Parent Association stepped in. The school district in San Diego was planning to open, I believe, and the teachers union, along with CTA lawyers, sued the school district to keep them closed. And so Parent Association came in and they sued and they won. Well, after that lawsuit, we get this, which we just, was discovered recently and publicized lately. So in April of 2021, a researcher from the California Teachers Association, the state union, emails parents that have been kind of working behind the scenes with the local union. And this researcher got that information from the lawyer that works for CTA that sued the school district to keep them closed. Well, in that, she says, hey, I'm doing research on all these reopen groups. I heard that you might have some information. And in subsequent emails, we see that they're really trying to target them on the affiliations and any kind of organizations that they're associated with. We see in public, before she shut her Twitter down, this researcher made all these comments that she was so sure that this reopen schools movement was driven by, right-wing dark money groups. And I could all of us laugh that are involved with that because, man, this would have been much more lucrative if we actually got paid for what we're doing instead of sacrificing so much time and in many cases our own money to get this done. But yeah, so this came out, and in the process of this exchange, one parent, who I believe also happens to be a lawyer, accidentally CC'd the principal of a school district. I don't remember his last name. His first name was Adam, whereas one of the other persons on the email chain was Adam. And then they quickly took him off the email and said, what are we going to do? We got to do damage control. Maybe you can ask him to delete it. So at that point, she loops this principal back in and alludes that it should be deleted, saying, I think he's busy. I'm sure he will delete it. And because of that, we now have a public records request unrelated to this incident, not aware that this was happening. It came to light, and it was shared with me over the weekend. I think it was posted on a private Facebook group the weekend before, and I was like, "Whoa, this is huge!" and Scott and I were talking about that and said, "Yeah, this is pretty big." And I think we released it publicly with the assistance of these parents that pulled the public records request on a Monday. It was Labor Day, and sure enough, right when people see that the California Teachers Association was spending resources and time targeting parents and performing opposition research on parents for simply wanting schools to open, many were outraged, and it just demonstrates, I think, what we've all seen was that these teachers unions are not just simply negotiators for teachers. At this point, they've become very political organizations, not just from their direct political contributions, but I mean the fact that they're doing opposition research on their political enemies, if you will, which should not be, right? We should be partners in this. We are parents. We are all here to serve our kids, but ultimately that is not what was seen in this. And just quickly, this resonates with a similar story that happened a year earlier, where UTLA, the teachers union for the LAUSD, the second largest in the country, which is part of the whole CFT AFT branch, so not CTA. They were performing research on parents who were speaking publicly in articles. And their goal was to try to prove that it was, quote, rich white parents who were behind the reopening, and that trying to drive this narrative that reopening schools was racist back then. So we saw a little bit of that, and that broke about a year and a half ago.
And so, Scott, you were saying that down in Carlsbad, you are seeing very similar tactics and techniques exercised by your local union as well?
Right. Yeah. And so it happened to be really bad timing for our local union, is at the same time as that story came out that the CTA, branch, up in Sacramento was doing this opposition research against parents, that my local, CTA, union here in Carlsbad had sent a letter to faculty members and put it in their, inboxes at one of the high schools, basically mainly to the teachers who weren't in the union, and trying to sell them on coming back to the union, and basically, lamenting that, yes, we understand that, a bunch of you disagree with the politics of the CTA, but here's all the benefits of being in the teachers union, and we hope you come back, and you don't have to be, it doesn't have to be all hyper political. And so, there's obviously a divide within the teachers union that a lot of them agree that the leadership and what's happening at CTA is way too political. And like Jonathan said, the teachers union should be partnering with parents, not opposing them. And so this letter starts out by saying, yes, there's this divide and CTA is too political. And so come back to the union because we have all these other benefits for, negotiation and education and which are all things that are true. Right. And then at the end of the letter, they said, and by the way, we have candidates like Scott Davison that, are trying to, union busters and are trying to dismantle public education. And so, don't support people like that. which is a violation of state campaign law in California. And so, of course, it got reported, and the teachers who got it were, aghast, because here's this letter trying to claim that they don't have to be political, and then it goes hyper political and tries to advocate, against my campaign for obvious reasons, because I'm running against somebody who works for the, California Teachers Association, and so they are desperate to, keep their power and keep this vote on the board that they've essentially bought. And so you see that, they're still desperate, as much as they pretend that they want the union to represent what unions used to do. They still have just kind of gone off the deep end and gone too far off in, left field, to use too many cliches, about, trying to get into this political arena that, parents and other teachers and, even, some of the students are just kind of thinking this isn't what teachers unions are supposed to do. So that's been the most recent developments even here at the local level.
And so why are unions choosing this path? Why are unions choosing the path of trying to keep schools closed, fighting against parents, and really seeming to put both the best interests of the students who they're supposed to be teaching, and in many cases, the teachers who they're supposed to be representing, last? And just like this blind power grab seems to be driving things. Like, why?
I think it mainly goes back to the 2020 election, and that, the teachers unions felt like they just needed to oppose whatever, the Republicans were doing. And so as soon as Trump said schools should reopen, then they felt like, well, the only way we're going to win our election is if we do the opposite and say that schools need to be closed. And I think that was maybe just the trigger, and that they basically oppose whatever the other political party is doing. Because if you look at the donations, from the teachers unions, they're, 90-something% of them go to the Democrats. And so, that's really unfortunate, because school board positions, especially in California, are not partisan positions. We don't run as Democrats or Republicans. This is a nonpartisan seat. I think everybody agrees that it should be a nonpartisan seat. There's no reason for, political parties to be involved at the school board level. And so to have the teachers unions basically decide to make this all a political debate was really unfortunate, and there were some other, political influences in California at the same time too, where they were the teachers union had put a proposition on the ballot in California. They wanted voters to increase taxes on businesses and commercial properties and things like that they wanted to use to fund schools. And so they also sort of felt, and you saw this, agenda come out over the summer in 2020 as well, that, well, if we don't pass this proposition and get these billions of dollars in funding for schools, they're just not going to be safe to reopen. And so that was also this kind of political agenda that the teachers union had written this proposition. They desperately wanted it to pass, and they decided that the best way to convince people to vote for it was to hold schools hostage and hold our students hostage and say, well, we just can't open the schools because we don't have the funding to make them safe. But hey, if this proposition, 15 passes, then we'll have the money and then we can open your schools, right? And so, again, that didn't pass, by the way. I think that was, backfired in terms of the messaging. But long story short is I think that the leadership at these unions has just really decided that they have a political agenda. They're very, kind of one-sided on the political spectrum, and it doesn't really represent the majority of their members. Certainly in my local union, we have plenty of teachers that talk to me and support me and tell me exactly what their union is doing that completely disagree. And whenever they take a vote on closing schools, they actually voted to reopen the schools in January of 2021, when the union leadership was basically claiming that the teachers didn't want to reopen. And so then we found out that the membership actually did want to reopen, and they disagreed with what the leadership was doing. So I think that's a huge disconnect that the unions are going to have to deal with, is that their leadership in their political agenda doesn't match what their members want out of the union.
Jonathan, are you seeing that up by you as well? Are you seeing the similar split between the union and the actual people there, or what are the other issues in your school board race?
In my area, our local teachers are great partners where I'm at. So they disagree with CTA quite a bit on these issues. But again, when it comes to the negotiation side and just being part of it, and they're still being sold. Now, CTA lost 4,000 members, I believe, last year. It was, although they raised their premiums or their union dues, so they actually made more money. I'm not seeing that piece, and I think a lot of teachers are just tired of the politicization that's going on in our schools and this focus. It's like, really, we need to just get back to partnering and back to educating our kids. But to answer the other question, I think Scott nailed it with regards to the funding and holding a hostage. I mean, really, they were doing this for funding. And what we saw with COVID was really just an example of, I think, something that's been going on for decades. It just hasn't been as apparent because not as many people have been paying attention, and it wasn't as big. And that is, it is a political power machine. It's not necessarily, and it's like any means possible, right, to achieve your objectives. So their objective was to not let a crisis go unused or wasted, and take this opportunity to get as much funding as we can, right? Not realizing or recognizing this is actually, well, maybe they did and they just didn't care how harmful it was to students. And frankly, it's really frustrating. They won. I mean, they got one of the largest packages of funding from the federal government. We got, but the same thing here in California, one of the largest packages. In Los Angeles, they almost doubled their entire budget in just the supplemental funding. I mean, it was just absurd with how much money they got there. And so with that, I think really it was just evident that it's just a strong power structure that they have, and they're willing to do whatever it takes from behind the scenes, in the open, whatever it is to get that done.
All right. So moving forward, you guys have your school board races. Things seem, or I like to call it, a veil of normality has returned. Kids are seemingly in school full time. Most of the quarantining and arbitrary masking are gone mostly, right? We're still dealing with them here and there. What should we be looking out for moving forward? What are some other issues that are really concerning parents and their families? And how can we be proactive, right? These whole last 2.5 years, we've just had to basically play defense. How can we get some offense going?
One thing is we have to partner, I think, with the local teachers and help them understand, right, for the ones that don't already, that we need to really focus on kids, and let's get this politics out of the classroom and out of the whole union side of it. We should focus on them. I think that's one. Another topic that I hear is a little bit on the curriculum stuff, but that again ties to politics. The idea is we just want to keep politics out of the classroom. It's always going to be there in other aspects, maybe even the boardroom, but not the classroom. So I would say that's kind of the number one issue. And then that kind of goes along with that is partnering with other local agencies and local school boards. One of the things that I saw that was very successful at getting our schools open, and at least where I'm at, and getting masks off kids, was the partnerships between all the different local school districts and different agencies and parents kind of coming together and fighting some of this institutional power that really combats the benefit of the kids and really focuses on special interests. So, for example, there's many school districts in California are represented by, I think, like two different legal firms that have a very different viewpoint on what should be done. We have superintendents that, depending where you're at, that will continually lie or mislead just to get parents to shut up, or even to get school board members to shut up and stop asking questions. That whole culture needs to change, and we need to focus on getting more transparency and honesty out there on these issues and partner. So those are some things that I would say that maybe not many people talk about, but as a typical issue for school board races.
Yeah, and down here in Carlsbad, I think the big issues that we have are recovering kids from the pandemic and from learning loss and from being in these restricted environments for the past 2.5 years. And just trying to assess, how far behind are they? Are they dealing with, mental health and emotional health issues like anxiety and depression? And we know they are. And so I think, the big challenge for our school district is just admitting that these are problems. Because I think if you're a school district like mine that kept schools closed for over a year and that, doesn't want to admit that was a mistake, then you also don't want to admit that caused problems, right? You don't want to admit that, that kids fell behind and that they're, far below where they should be. You don't want to admit that we've lost, 700 something students in an 11,000 school district. So we've lost, hundreds of kids that just left, and we don't know where they went, but that's going to cost our school district millions and millions of dollars in funding, because every, student who leaves is money that goes out the door. And so until we, message normal and message that we can help them get caught up, And until we devote, funding and resources to helping them get caught up, I don't know that, people are going to be confident, in sending their kids back to our schools. And so we need to message normal. We need to make sure that parents realize that we're willing to, to do these assessments and find out where their kids are academically and emotionally and mentally. And so those are the big challenges that I think, we have down here, going forward, is we need, school board members who are willing to tackle, some of these uncomfortable, issues, and be transparent about it. As parents feel that they were ignored, parents feel like their kids went through a lot and the school district is, pretending like they didn't, and just, didn't listen. And so I think that's one of the things that myself and Jonathan and others are hoping to bring, is some transparency and communication back to these school boards that really kind of turned against parents and just, felt, that they had to stick to their guns and didn't want to assess, the potential harms of all of these COVID mitigation problems, and just, went with whatever they were told to do, everything we have to do to stop COVID, when obviously we didn't stop COVID. And then in the process, we harmed kids. And so we need, parents on the board and other people on the board who understand the consequences of these decisions and are willing to weigh those and put students first.
And thank you so much, Jonathan and Scott, for joining me today to cover the latest issues, and best of luck in your school board races.